Hello and welcome to this week's negotiation nugget on 5 key distinctions between an average and expert retail negotiator. Now, in this 10-minute update, I'm just going to give you 5 key distinctions to look out for to assess whether or not you're operating at an expert negotiation level when it comes to your interactions with suppliers. So, let me pull up my slide. So these are the 5 key distinctions, and I'm just going to go into them a little bit deeper. So the first one is around preparation. Now, it's obvious for all types of negotiators, whether you're average or expert, that preparation is critical and key to negotiation outcomes. The distinction between whether you're average or expert, however, relies on understanding what level of depth you're actually going into when you're doing your preparation and to what degree you're applying the discipline needed to really have that preparation work for you. So when it comes to preparation, one, the discipline in an expert negotiator is actually boundarying time around it to make sure that you really understand that preparation is part of the negotiation process and actually would equate to over 90% of the outcomes you can get come from the discipline that you apply in your preparation and your planning. When you're actually going into your preparation as a retail buyer, thinking about the suppliers that you're actually negotiating with, you really want to go into the depth of understanding what your suppliers are up against. Now, I know a lot of retail commercial buyers do not read the annual reports of the suppliers that they are negotiating with. And that is an easy opportunity to up-level your planning. It's an annual report once a year if it's a public listed company that you can read not only the chairman's statement, the director's overviews, but also having a look at the financial situations of the suppliers that you're actually negotiating with. What do you know about them? What are their current challenges? Where are they focused their energies and efforts over the year ahead? And how can you leverage that understanding to drive better outcomes in creating value for both parties in the business? So the planning around understanding the supplier counterparty through annual reports is one, but understanding what circumstances are currently in play. So what's actually happening right now? How has this negotiation come about? Is it an annual terms review? Is it a 3-year joint business partnership review? Is it a price negotiation? Is there been shifts in the way supply has been provided that's prompted a second negotiation following a previous one that had already locked out contract values? What are the circumstances surrounding the negotiation to then determine in what way you're operating to get value? Because someone that's operating because it's a pre-planned timeline and it's a 3-year renegotiation would be operating very differently than if it's an emergency negotiation prompted by a change of circumstances. And all of that planning gives you further information on how you might use that intelligently to drive value. So thinking about the power dynamics also, so not only just the market dynamics, which is an obvious thing to do as an average negotiator, but really thinking about where does power currently sit, recognizing that power is something that is either actual or perceived power. So what is your perception of the other party's power? What is their perception of your power? And is it real or is it just perception only? In what way can you validate that? And leverage is slightly different. So you might have less power, but you might have more leverage. Understanding where the levers for both parties sit, again, amplify your negotiation skill set, not just from an average negotiation perspective, but actually operating like an expert negotiator. And adding to that preparation, you're thinking about the person. Who am I negotiating with? What do I know about them? But not what do I know about them just through the relationship I've had in the period that I've worked with them. What do I really know about the way they behave when they are in flow state, at their best, operating more casually? What's that baseline? And then what have I observed about how they operate when they're under stress? What tells give them away? What behavioral clues have I got about the other party that I'm dealing with? And as I said, average negotiators do not do that level of thinking, but expert negotiators absolutely will. And then you focus also on the strategic elements of the negotiation. What strategically the focus areas for both parties, and building that into the thinking around how you're planning. Now, I've spent 5 minutes of this update already on planning because that highlights the importance of the discipline of planning, because all of the other 4 elements that are going to make you stand out from being an average negotiator hinge on the level of planning that you've already done. The second one is communication. And what we're really looking at here is boundaries around communication. Have you already predetermined what you will and won't share? And have you aligned that with your teams and the different touch points that you have with supply and your suppliers, so that you understand where the different touch points for information sources are with your suppliers, and that everyone's on the same hymn sheet around what's to be communicated and what's not to be communicated. Along with that, it's active listening. We know listening and asking questions is part of negotiation. An average negotiator will know that. But what makes you distinct as an expert negotiator is really listening to think about, what information am I gathering now that I didn't know before? And in what way does this help me create value? In what way does it highlight there's challenges or red flags that I need to be aware of? Getting curious and going deeper with that is critical, because along with that, when you can demonstrate your curiosity, you're more likely to pay attention to not only what is said in their verbal communication, but also their non-verbal communication. And that again comes a lot from the planning. If you know what to look for, then when you're in the room, you can start to see more clearly the distinctions between how someone's showing up when they're having an everyday account management conversation with you versus a renegotiation of the joint business plan. And what you can do when you're communicating is more effectively than the average negotiator, is articulate why certain terms are more important to you than others. Now, average negotiators will say things like, oh, everything's important. But frankly, that doesn't help value to be created, because you're not giving your counterparty the opportunity to really discern what's important and where value can be leveraged. And in that communication, you can anticipate what is going to be asked from them. So when you're thinking about how to respond, you respond because your planning has already given you a sense of what are they likely to ask me and how will I answer that, so that you are not in the moment communicating information that gives power away or gives more information than is needed, but you are very articulate about where value can be created, and it's boundaried in the way you communicate that. The third one is creativity. So when you are being an expert negotiator versus an average negotiator, you're not even really aware that there's a box. So most people say it's in the box thinking versus out the box thinking. For me, creativity is what box? There is no box. You're not hemmed into the boundaries of the existing variables that are on the table. You're actually taking a very broad global systems focus to value creation. So that's looking at the value chain right the way through, from purchase through distribution to customers in store, and really looking at where is value created in the business, and in what way could this negotiation strategically deliver value outside of my remit, but also help the business much more broadly. And that's where you really then focus on alignment around strategic objectives. You get creative, you put more variables into the negotiation than might have existed prior to your planning, but prior to the initial thinking. But the opportunity exists because you have creatively thought about the wider system, rather than what is my area of responsibility, what is my category, what is my supplier base. And actually I'm thinking much broader as to where value can be created. And that in itself requires trust, because you can't explore where value is created if you are an average negotiator being really tactical about the way you communicate to others. If you focus on strategic depth and partnership, that's where you can really get creative and look to create value longer term. The final two are linked around emotional intelligence and flexibility. The emotional intelligence piece, if you're an expert negotiator, what you understand about emotional intelligence is that it links to performance outcomes. Self-awareness and EQ just in isolation is great, but if you can't make the connection between performance outcome and the way you demonstrate your emotional intelligence, you're in an average negotiation box. You aren't demonstrating expert negotiation skills, because expert negotiators recognize their emotional intelligence is made up of self-awareness and other awareness, but also linking to their stress management, the way they make decisions, and how they ultimately build interpersonal relationships. With high EQ focused negotiators, you focus not only on the intention of your communication, but you own your impact too. Too often negotiators do not own their impact. They're focused very much on self and can't see or have a blind spot around the impact the way they communicate has on the other party. And again, if you are highly developed in your emotional intelligence, which can be developed and grown over time, you are much more able to observe your own ego and how that ego has a desire to win versus what you also might be driven by, which might be a fear. You know, what should I share? What shouldn't I share? How can I build a deeper relationship without giving a sense that we're too close, and therefore my objective way of communicating could be compromised. When you are emotionally intelligent and aware, you know exactly how far you can push the depth of the relationship while maintaining objectivity and maintaining the appropriate level of distance with your counterparty, but can still create value because you've demonstrated a deep awareness of your own ego, understand theirs, and how you can communicate more effectively, knowing what you do about yourself and each other. The final one, flexibility, is all about being adaptive in the moment. Really thinking back to planning and how much time is spent planning. When you have planned effectively, when you have considered all the different scenarios that could play out with the different suppliers, you can be more adaptive in the moment and strategically move without compromising the entire deal. Too often I've seen retail buyers say, I'll have to come back to you, or it's a default no if you're an average negotiator, because what you haven't done is prepared for the different scenarios that an alternate supplier could actually offer and challenge you on. And in the moment, you haven't thought about them, and therefore it's a default no, rather than let's see what we can do and how we can move around that strategically. So again, it does come down to planning, but when you can be more strategic about the way you move, you already know what concessions you can and cannot move on. You're likely to keep the dialogue in flow in your control more effectively, because you are able to be flexible in the moment, because it's not reactive, it's responsive to what comes to you at the table, because you've already planned how you've set the table, how you've designed the deal, and what might come up in advance. And also, by being able to plan effectively, the flexibility comes because you're in the room. You don't have to think about what am I doing next, where am I going, because you already have a plan, you know your moves, you know how you're going to do them. And what it allows you to then focus on in how do I create value, rather than focusing on what is my next move. And my last comment there is around value versus penalties. Typically what I see in negotiations is often we look to punish suppliers if they're not meeting particular KPIs or criteria. And that demonstrates actually the natural default to penalty focus negotiating is an average negotiation approach. The expert negotiator would look at that and go, okay, there's a clear problem, there's a clear challenge, there's a clear opportunity for leverage here with us versus what the supplier is experiencing. How can I use that leverage? How can I use their challenge? How can I use what's not being delivered on as an opportunity to create more value, rather than just penalize them for what they have not delivered on? So the thinking is very different when you're an average negotiator versus an expert negotiator. I have rattled on for 14 minutes, 4 minutes over my allocated 10-minute negotiation slot. So I hope that was okay and that you got some value from this content. If you have got any further questions or there's further topics you would like me to explore, please do not hesitate to drop me a message or email me, and I will do my best to answer any of those queries. Thanks very much. Have a great week ahead.